See, I don't see the screen. There, I do.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I actually have a menu plan this week, so I haven't told anyone about it.
Hi, Stacey. No one is talking yet. We're going to give it another minute or two before we start the presentation. Just make sure that everybody does have their microphones off, so there's no background noise while we do the meeting. And like I said, we'll just give it another minute or two before we start. Thank you. All right, it is 1:30. We will go ahead and get started. Today is the Contractor's Excise Tax Seminar. My name is Lisa Zelsdorf. I've been with the Department of Revenue for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years next month. I will be co-presenting with Denise Lickness. She's been with the department for, I believe it's been almost 25 years. So she has been with here for significantly longer than me. We will take a break about midway through the presentation. It'll be about a 10 to 15 minute break, and then we will swap and she'll do the second half. Any questions that you do have, you can ask in the chat. She will be monitoring the chat the first half. I will monitor the chat the second half. So don't be shy to ask questions while we're going through the presentation. We may ask that you email us a question. We will put our emails in the chat. They were also an email that you got with the confirmation. So you can email us any questions that you do have or email the business tax email. So let's get started. Just the housekeeping, this presentation and the materials that accompany it do not constitute as written advice to any specific taxpayer under SDCL 1059-27. So any specific questions you have on any specific tax questions that you have that pertain to your business, give us a call, send us an email. We can answer your specific questions that pertain to your business. Who needs a contractor's excise tax license? Anyone who is entering a contract for construction services listed in Division C of the Standard Industrial Classification Manual of 1987. Anyone who is engaging in services including construction, building, installation, or repair of a fixture to real property, or anyone who is engaging in repair or remodeling of existing real property or the construction of a new project. You need an excise tax license for each business location, not job location. You must be licensed before you start work. You do not need a license for each construction site. SDCL 518B17, no purchasing agency may award a contract for the construction of any public improvement unless the contractor has a South Dakota contractor's excise tax license. So if you are bidding a project, make sure that the company that you're awarding the project to has a South Dakota contractor's excise tax license before you award them the project. What is contractor's excise tax? It is a 2% tax on the gross receipts and value of the owner furnished materials of all the prime contractors engaged in construction services or realty improvement projects, and 2% on the gross receipts of all prime and subcontractors engaged in construction services or realty improvements for qualified utility projects. No prime contractor is exempt from contractor's excise tax in the state of South Dakota. How to determine if a contract is subject to contractor's excise tax. Is the service listed in the SIC Manual Division C? If it is, it's subject to excise tax. If it's not in Division C of the SIC Manual, do the services entail the construction, building, installation, or repair of a fixture to realty? Also, if it does, contractor's excise tax. There are 2 exceptions to this, which we'll get into later, and those are floor laying and locksmith shops. A fixture is either hardwired or direct wired, bolted or affixed to the real property, and plumbed in, connected or direct to water or sewer. It's intended to be permanent, adapted to real property, or annexed or attached to the real property. When is the excise tax due? In the cash accounting method, it's when payment or the draw is received. Accrual is when the sale is recorded, whether it or not it has been paid. And then use tax is due at the time when the items or services are purchased or when the owner furnished material is received. Your gross receipts include labor, excise tax collected, indirect payments, awards or bonuses, retainage, draws on loans, sales or use tax on materials, sweat equity, penalties, liquidated damages, barter transactions, and building permits and fees. Owner furnished materials not included in gross receipts on qualified utility projects, and it's the greater of the cost or fair market value on those owner furnished materials. There are no deductions for subcontractors, costs of service or labor purchased, taxes and expenses or loss. Sweat equity. So if the owner provides part of the construction in exchange for a reduction in the amount due for the contractor, the prime contractor should give the owner an exemption certificate, and the prime contractor cannot deduct for the amounts allowed the owner for their portion of the work. Indirect payments. Amounts paid to others, material suppliers, or subcontractors on behalf of the prime contractor. Gross receipts of the prime, even if the payment is made directly by the person the realty improvement is for. So that would be bank payments made to the contractor's supplier directly from the homeowner's construction payment or the construction loan. Penalties or liquidated damages, money or interest deducted for late completion, penalties or interest or liquidated damages paid by the contractor if may not be deducted from the gross receipts. If the deadline is not met, the penalty is taxable. And then awards or bonuses, amounts received for early completion. These do need to be completed or included in your gross receipts when you're reporting your excise tax. With the barters, equipment, supplies, or services in exchange for labor, the value of the tangible personal property or service determines the amount subject to contractor's excise tax. So if you have a person who contracts with a retailer to paint the outside of their store in exchange for a new air compressor, and the value of the compressor is $2,000, the person owes $2,000 of excise tax. If the contract spells out the value of the labor and the value of the equipment is higher than the value of the labor, the contractor pays the retailer the difference. The contractor's excise tax is due only on the labor value. So if they do the barter in exchange for credit towards the air compressor, and the value of the air compressor is $2,000, and he gives him $1,000 plus his labor, and the value of the labor is $1,000, the excise tax is only due on $1,000 instead of the $2,000. And then make sure that with the building permit fees, that all amounts received for all licenses or permits required for a project are included, and that you do include those in your gross receipts. Retainage, and that's the percentage of each payment that is withheld until the project is completed. Once the project is completed and work is approved, the contractor receives this retainage. When you're on the cash basis, you're going to owe the contractor's excise tax when the retainage is actually paid. The accrual basis is when is due when the full amount is invoiced. So even if the contractor does not receive that retainage, they're still going to owe the excise tax when it's invoiced. We do have a bid factor that you can use when you are bidding the jobs for the contractor's excise tax. This can only be used to prepare the bid or the invoice. You do need to show the 2% on the invoice, as well as when you are calculating the excise tax that's due on your return. The bid factor is 2.041%. We do have a calculator that's on our website. The link is there. You can also go to our website and there's a link for it on the excise tax page as well. This just helps you cover all of your costs when you are bidding a project, just to make sure that you're not pulling anything out of your pocket to pay the excise tax that's due. You're collecting it all from your customer. So here is an invoice example. So your excise tax that is due, your material is $10,000. That does include your sales tax that is paid at the time of purchase. Your labor is $5,000, and then your $1,500 in miscellaneous. So your subtotal is $16,500. You're going to use that bid factor of 2.041%. When you're preparing your bid to your customer. And then when you go to do your excise tax that's due, you're going to use that 2%. So your excise tax that's due is the $336.74. But when you are bidding it to the customer and providing it their invoice, the amount that's due to them is the $336.77. So you're going to see it's just a few pennies difference. But if you are going to bid it to the customer and just use the 2%, you can see that it's about $6.74 difference. So that's where that bid factor does come in handy to make sure that that $6.74 does not come out of your pocket, but you are collecting it from the customer on that invoice. Owner furnished materials. Owner furnished materials are any materials that your owner is supplying to you when you are doing a project for them. The prime contractor is going to owe contractor's excise tax on the value, except for qualified utility projects. The fair market value includes a sale or excise tax, or sale or use tax on the materials. State and municipal tax due on the cost of material if no documentation showing sales or use tax was paid. The value is included in the excise tax calculation, and you can report this on line 2 of the tax return during the reporting period that the material is furnished to the contractor for use. So documentation, yep.
We do have a question, and
Okay.
just want to let this, basically she's talking about primary purpose and 25% rule, which we will be getting in later, and we will actually be going over a couple slides regarding that. So we will talk to you about that shortly.
All right. And going back to the documentation for the owner furnished materials, if you're doing a job for a customer, you're putting on a new deck for them. They pick up the materials for you to put on this deck for their house, and they get it from Menards, Lowe's. Just asking for a copy of their receipt, showing that they paid the tax for that decking material, and just keep that on hand. Keep that in your records, just showing that they paid the sales tax on that decking. That's as far as you have to go into that. Just showing that you paid that they paid the sales tax on that material. Because if you don't have that, and you have a review or an audit of your license down the road, because you're the end user of that material, you are liable for any use tax for that material if you don't have record of it, since you're the one doing the installation of the material. And this is a slide showing how to use the excise tax on owner furnished materials. So the gross receipts is going to be that $520.41. The owner furnished materials is $500. So the excise tax that is due is the $1,020.41 at the 2%. So your tax due is $20.41. So the labor, the owner furnished materials, they're each 500. That 2.041% is 2041. So your total invoice is 520.41.
There is another question. Is the
Okay.
calculator on the website? And Sarah, yes, it is. It's on our website.
Yep, it's going to be along the right-hand side of when you're on the main page for the contractor's excise tax page. It's going to say calculator, bid factor calculator. So the difference between a prime contractor and a subcontractor. The prime contractor is anyone who is entering into the contract for construction services or realty improvements. The best way to remember that is if you're the one that is collecting the money, you're the one that the contractor, the person taking the money, the person the contract is with, you're the prime contractor. The subcontractor is the one who is, you have the contract with the person who is making the decisions and you are just working for them. You're not with the owner. So you are the one that can accept a prime contractor's exemption certificate from the prime contractor to do the work for them.
We have another question. What are
Okay.
the common deductions in the contractor's gross receipts for excise tax purposes? There isn't really any deductions for contractors' gross receipts. A contractor is subject to tax on the total amount that they actually bill their customer. The 2% excise tax is what we call a gross receipts tax. So there really isn't any deductions for that. A subcontractor can, when he files his return, he can deduct his subcontract receipts if he is given an exemption certificate, and she was going over that just now, but really there isn't any deductions for excise tax.
A prime contractor needs to have a contractor's excise tax license. They contract with the owner. They report the gross receipts, including the owner furnished materials. They owe the use tax on the materials if sales tax was not previously paid. They can give out the prime contractor's exemption certificate, and they pay the contractor's excise tax. The subcontractors do need to also have a contractor's excise tax license. They contract with the prime contractor or with another subcontractor. They report the gross receipts. They do not include owner furnished materials. They will owe the use tax on any materials that they supply themselves if sales tax was not previously paid. They receive the prime contractor's exemption certificate, and they do not pay the contractor's excise tax if they have a contractor's exemption certificate, unless it is that qualified utility project. Subcontractors, when they are filing their returns for any jobs that they have done, they're still going to report any receipts that they have. So any jobs that they have done, any including any subcontracting jobs, they're going to report all of that on line 1 of the return. Then they're going to deduct any subcontractor receipts on line 3 of the return. So this just shows that they're doing the work, but somebody else is picking up that tax. They cannot deduct any receipts for qualified utility projects, and they are still going to owe sales or use tax on any materials that they supply. So you're still going to be responsible for any sales use tax on materials that you're purchasing for jobs that you're doing, even if you are a subcontractor. And this is a copy of that prime contractor's exemption certificate. It is the prime contractor's responsibility to issue. If a subcontractor hires another subcontractor, the prime must issue the prime contractor's exemption certificate. So even if a sub hires another sub, that prime is the one that needs to issue it to the sub. I always recommend that if you're a subcontractor working for a prime and you have not received that prime contractor's exemption certificate, it never hurts to follow up with them and to say, hey, I haven't received that prime contractor's exemption certificate. Do you have one that you can give me? And they're not issued to material suppliers or sales taxable service providers. Those are sales tax, so they do not fall under the excise tax, and they cannot be issued on qualified utility projects. And then to be properly completed, they must show the prime contractor's excise tax license number, the project location, and project description. Day laborers, if you do hire day laborers, you can give them a prime contractor's exemption certificate. If the work being done is sales taxable, the contractor owes use tax on the amount being paid to the day laborer. And if you're hiring somebody from a temp agency, this is sales taxable regardless of the type of work being done.
We have another question. If in case I gave the subcontractor the exemption form and they still charge me the 2% excise tax, can contractors claim that as a deduction in the gross receipts to avoid double taxation? No, if you give them an exemption certificate and they bill you for the 2%, you can contact them and cross it off and don't pay it. But if you do pay it, all of your receipts are subject to the excise tax. So you would still need to pay it. You wouldn't be able to deduct it. So in a case that you give the exemption form to them and they still charge you, just don't pay it. And she would like you to repeat what you said about temp workers.
Yep. So if you hire a day laborer and they're doing work that is considered excise taxable, you can give them the prime contractor's exemption certificate. But if you are going through a temp agency, so you're working with an agency that provides you with temporary workers, this is a sales taxable service. So they're going to charge you sales tax regardless of the type of work that's being done. And as far as 1099 employees, they're independent contractors, so they do need to have their own sales or excise tax license, and they can be hired if they're an excise taxable license. They can be hired as a subcontractor as well. All right, and some more information on the prime contractor's exemption certificate. Blanket certificates cannot be issued. They must list a specific project. And the certificates may not be issued by U.S. government, the state of South Dakota, any state, public, or municipal corporation, and the owner of a project, unless the owner is a prime contractor for the building or remodeling with the intention of selling the property, or for the building property to lease. And then only prime contractors can issue those exemption certificates. The penalty for issuing a certificate when not the prime, you're liable for the contractor's excise tax not paid plus a 10% penalty. Subs must retain the certificate in the records. Failure to do that is considered to be a prime and you're subject to that 2% excise tax. And this is just another close-up copy of it, just to show that this is the information that does need to be filled out for each job that you do. Sales and use tax with the excise tax. Contractors are responsible for paying sales or use tax on all purchases of products, services, regardless of who owns the materials. This includes materials installed in the construction projects and all equipment, tools, and supplies used by the contractor. This goes back to Administrative Rule 6409116. General contractors are liable for use tax on all items of tangible personal property used or consumed in the performance of their contract, including those portions of the contract performed by subcontractors. The prime can be held liable for use tax on materials furnished by the subcontractor. Use tax, it would apply if the supplier does not charge applicable sales tax based on where the contractor receives the product. Reported on the excise tax return when the contractor receives the product. So if you pick it up in the store, the state and city tax applies at the store's location. If you have it delivered, state and city tax applies where it's delivered, and it applies to the cost of the material, including delivery and handling charges. So it is just like the sales tax. It's like sales tax after the fact. So it applies point of possession and including any delivery or handling charges. And if the contractor uses a material at a city that imposes a higher sales tax rate, the contractor must pay the additional city use tax in the reporting period that the contractor uses the material. And then there's recycled materials. If identified as previously used in ownership and does not change, no use tax is due. So this would be like if you had a barn, you knew that the barn had the materials previously paid sales tax on. You tore the barn down and you reuse the materials, you repurpose the materials to use it again. You know the sales tax was paid, so no use tax would be due on those materials. And then another example, if you purchased materials at a lumber yard in Bruce, Bruce only has a 1% city tax. If you take those materials into Brookings to use those at a job when you're building a house where the city tax is 2%, you're going to end up owing an additional 1% city tax, use tax for bringing those materials into Brookings. And then no credit is given if the materials are purchased in a city where the sales tax rate is higher.
We do have a question. It says this is a snip of an excise tax return. There is item 3 deductions. What is the nature of those deductions since the excise tax is on the gross receipts? Okay, Israel, the deductions would be subcontractors. So if you were a subcontractor and you did $1,000 worth of receipt, that would go on line 1. Then you got an exemption certificate from the prime and they would give that to you. You could deduct that under line 3. So that is set up for a deduction as a subcontractor. You know, subcontractors sometimes often work as primes too. So there might be $10,000 that he did and 5,000 of it was subcontract, the other was prime. So then he'd have 10,000 in the gross receipts, deduct his 5,000 that he got the exemption certificate, and then he would owe tax on the 5,000. That's why we have a deduction on line 3. That's for subcontract receipts. Does that explain it a little bit?
All right, and this page here is just showing some invoice calculations. This specific invoice calculation is for a tax exempt entity because it is showing use tax. So when you are working with a tax exempt entity, they are not paying sales tax on the materials that they're providing to you. So you can show use tax on the invoice where do not show sales tax on the materials, the owner furnished materials on the invoice, show use tax or roll it into your owner furnished materials. So in this case, you have labor of $5,000, owner furnished materials of $10,000, and then the use tax of $620, which is the 6.2% on that $10,000. So your subtotal is going to be $15,620. Your excise tax is that 2.041%. which is $318.80. So your invoice calculation to this customer is $15,938.80. And then this is how you would then show it on the invoice. So your gross receipts are the $5,938.80. Your owner furnished materials are going to be the $10,000. And then your excise tax that's due. And then your use taxable of that $10,000 to show the $420 that's due. And then there is your state tax that is due. And then because they used it in Sioux Falls, they're going to have that additional 2% of city tax that is due. And that'll be $200. So that gives them a total amount due on the return of $938.78. So you can see it was just a few pennies difference between the invoice total and the return. And that made sure that what they billed the customer was a little bit more than what the return was. So they covered all of their costs when they invoiced the customer. Equipment and out-of-state purchases. So new equipment purchased for use in the state of South Dakota is subject to South Dakota sales or use tax. Used equipment that is brought into the state by a contractor who originally purchased it for use in another state is subject to use tax if it is less than 7 years old, and it is on the fair market value of the equipment. And then out-of-state purchases, materials or equipment delivered into the state are subject to South Dakota state or use tax, even if the supplier charges another state sales tax. Credit is given for tax properly paid to another state or reciprocity when purchased and received in that state. If less tax is charged in another state than applies in South Dakota, the contractor owes a difference in use tax to South Dakota. So if you're purchasing stuff in another state, bringing it in, make sure that you're paying at least 6.2% sales tax in that other state that you're purchasing it in and bringing it in. If not, then you will owe up to 6.2% sales tax. Most of the states we do have reciprocity with. There are a few states that we do not.
Yes.
There are some states that do not have sales tax.
Getting hit by lightning?
One of them is Montana. Montana does not have sales tax. So if you're purchasing something in Montana and bringing it into South Dakota, no matter where.
Because they were trying to call Chris, and Chris goes, my service is bad. Can you call?
No matter where you're bringing it into the state, you're going to owe 6.2% use tax from anything that you purchase from Montana and bring it into the state of South Dakota. Materials that you remove from inventory. So there are some businesses that have both a sales tax and excise tax license. Use tax is due when materials taken out of your inventory that you have unpaid, that you did not pay tax on when you're using it in a construction project, and it's based on where the material is used. Additional use tax is due if the material is removed from inventory in one city and used or consumed in another city that imposes a higher city tax. And use tax must be reported on your contractor's excise tax return. So if you have a plumbing company that purchases your pipe without sales tax as part of your retail inventory, and you keep it in Brandon, and you have a contract to install plumbing in a home in Sioux Falls, you're going to remove the pipe from your tax unpaid inventory, and you're going to pay 4.2% state use tax plus the Sioux Falls city use tax when you're installing that pipe in your home in Sioux Falls. And fabrication. Fabrication costs are excluded from fair market value of tangible personal property if fabrication is done by the contractor's employees. Tax is due on the raw material costs only, but if a third party is hired by the contractor to do the fabrication, sales use tax is due on the entire cost, including fabrication labor. So contractors can fabricate materials such as vents or ductwork, so they can purchase that material, they can fabricate it, and then they would owe the use tax on the raw material costs only, and then they can fabricate it and install it. And at this time, we are going to take about a 10-minute break. So it is 2:06 right now. So at about 2:16, we will get started again. If you do have any questions, you can certainly put them in the comments or in the chat box right now. We will be here to answer them during the break.
I'd like to welcome everybody back. I will be addressing that question, but first I'll just introduce myself. My name is Denise, and I've been working with the Department of Revenue for 25 years, doing these presentations, helping clients, doing applications, that type of thing. The question that was asked, and I will just read it and then I will answer it, is can you charge excise tax and sales tax on the same invoice, or should you? I know this accounting service won't process it that way, so they need to be on separate invoices. This kind of takes me back to what contractor's excise tax is, and it was established in 1978 to replace the personal property tax. The state of South Dakota has a contractor's excise tax that is unique to the whole United States. It isn't set up any other way. And there's only one other state that has an excise tax similar to this, and that's New Mexico, but it isn't anything like it. So contractor's excise tax is a 2% tax on the gross receipts of a contractor. It's not a tax on the client or the customer. It's a tax on the contractor. And the contractor is required to purchase all of their materials with sales tax included in it. So when they go to buy it, they should have sales tax charged to them. They are able to purchase their materials without tax, but then use tax is due. And the use tax is the same percentage as sales tax, and it's on their cost. Now, if you're dealing with a government entity and they supply materials to you, 90% of the time they did not pay any tax on that. So a contractor is required to pay use tax on any materials that a government entity may provide, or anybody provides to you as owner furnished materials without tax. So in a lot of cases, they will want to turn around and charge tax to the customer. Since the contractor has to pay the use tax on it, why shouldn't they turn around and charge the customer? You are not able to invoice the customer sales tax on a excise tax project. Now, there are ways that people will do two different invoices, and one invoice will have sales tax and the other won't. But you can invoice them use tax, but you cannot invoice them sales tax. And that use tax amount would have to be what you were paying and not marked up. So that's a situation where your accounting software program won't process it that way, because you can't have sales tax on an excise taxable job. I know that's confusing, but that's how it is. You can have use tax on it, but that would be basically what you are paying in cost. You can always mark up the labor, and that's what a lot of people will do, is they'll mark up the labor to cover the sales tax that they have to pay for the materials. Or they'll do what your software program, you'll invoice it on a separate but if you do it that way, keep in mind, you're going to owe that sales tax. Okay. So we're going to get into
Denise,
service.
can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
You sure can.
Just wanted to point out to anybody on the line who would like to get CPE credit for this class, if you could please drop your email into the form I just put in the chat right before the break, and we'll make sure you get that certificate. Thanks for letting me break in, Denise.
No problem. Okay, services. As a contractor, you will use services as a prime contractor. You may use some of these services that are listed on this slide. You know, engineering service, accounting services, let you go through all of them. But any of these services that the contractor uses, he needs to pay sales tax on it. So these are sales taxable services, and they're going to bill you sales tax. You cannot purchase these services for resale, so you would need to pay the sales tax on it. One thing I will touch bases is concrete pumping on here. Concrete pumping is sales tax applies if the concrete supplier simply just basically delivers the concrete and pours it into the prepared site. That's just a sale of TPP pretty much. The prime contractor must pay the sales tax to the service provider. they can't accept exemption certificates from them. Now, sometimes the concrete pumper, the supplier, will also pour the concrete. And that CET applies to that entire charge. So if they're providing the concrete, pouring the concrete, they're doing an excise taxable job, and then they would owe excise tax, or if they get an exemption certificate as a sub, they would not owe it, but they would still owe it on the concrete. The materials would be subject to sales tax or use tax. The service provider is responsible for the state and city tax of the services. So if they are licensed in the state of South Dakota with the sales tax license, they will go ahead and charge the contractor sales tax, and they will remit it to the state. You do have to be aware of the tax rates in each location that you're working. For example, if you have a repaired item that's delivered to a contractor in another county, that sales tax or use tax rate would apply. The state tax would be applied. But then if it is also used in a city, then the additional city tax, use tax would apply. So services performed on tangible personal property, it's where the property is delivered to the customer. Repairs like rag cleaning, fabrication, millwork, that type of thing. Services to real property, it's a property location where the service is performed. Carpet installation, surveying or staking, pest control. Use tax is due where the customer receives the service, consulting service, architecture services. So just keep in mind, as a contractor and you're using basically service providers, that it is based on this type. Use tax is also based on where the product is. So it is based on where your project is actually being used or being performed. Equipment rental or leased. If a piece of equipment is rented without an operator, it would be subject to sales tax. The first payment is taxed where the possession is taken, and if it is moved to different other locations, the subsequent payments would be taxed at the other locations. If it is rented with an operator, that tax depends on the use. If it is doing construction services, then it would be subject to excise tax. If it is doing a sales taxable transaction, then it would be sales tax. Construction managers, there's a lot of confusion with constructions managers because it can be sales taxable and it can be excise taxable. So it's kind of a dual use. So if it provides management, consulting services, oversees or supervises the construction project, if the contract doesn't include any construction or it has no contracts with the contractors, then it would be a sales taxable service. If they contract with the owner to build a building or other construction, they become the prime. So they may say they're a construction manager, but they're actually a prime contractor. And so then they would be able to give out exemption certificates to the subs, and they would be considered a prime and it'd be subject to contractor's excise tax. There are a number of different realty improvement situations that would sometimes be sales taxable, or they have, I always call them dual. They have both sales and excise tax on it. Had a question earlier, and then we're going to be addressing that at this point. These are some of the examples of realty improvement that can be, either way or both combined. Heating and cooling, plumbing, concrete, remodeling, electrical, carpentry, painting, and wallpapering. Okay, let's go with heating and air conditioning. When you have a furnace or an air conditioning, central air system put into your home, it is going to be subject to contractor's excise tax. But when you do that, you may set up a maintenance agreement, and that depends. That is taxable depending on what is covered by that agreement. Sales tax or excise tax is due for like repairs or installation of any type of repair work or installation of heating, central air, and such. Sales tax would be if you clean it. I used to have them come in the spring and check my furnace or check my air conditioning, and then in the fall to check my furnace. And they would just have, it was a maintenance agreement I paid, it was $50 for each time. And they would just make sure that everything was set up and good for that next season. If they do that and they don't do any repairs, they don't do any installation, they just do the cleaning, they may change your filter, just checking the sensors, that would be subject to sales tax. But if they go in the fall and they check it and there's something wrong, that they have to go in and repair it, they have to replace a sensor, or they have to replace ductwork or something like that, that turns into an excise taxable job. So then that would be subject to excise tax.
We do have a question.
Okay.
And it is, so what if that is a subcontractor?
So what is a subcontractor?
Do we pay excise tax if I have a subcontractor for the maintenance of HVAC?
If you have a subcontractor, you would be giving them the exemption certificate, and you would be paying as a prime contractor, you would be paying the tax on it depending on what you're doing to that setup. So if you are XYZ mechanical and you put in my my furnace, and I set it because I would set up that maintenance agreement with you, not with your subcontractor. So I'm paying you. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't know, as the owner, I don't know if that's a sub or not. So if you hire someone else to do it, you would be responsible for the tax and you would give them an exemption certificate. But if you're hiring them to do the work, you would be responsible for the excise. You'd bill me excise tax. So the maintenance, as far as the sales taxable portion, you wouldn't be hiring a subcontractor to do. And we will talk, there's another section that says, would parts be subject to use tax? That's coming on a little bit depending on the type of warranty and the type of agreement that you've got. So I do have a question, Sarah. Are you an accountant, or are you actually a prime contractor?
Can I just talk on here?
Sure.
Okay, so a prime contractor who gets a government contract for service on HVAC equipment is what I'm trying to put my head around here. Not repairs, just changing belts, filters, oiling, cleaning, starting up, just what you said, like your home. For the government, so the government is sales tax exempt and it's on a reservation, but I am hiring a subcontractor HVAC professional to do it.
Well, if you are not doing a excise taxable job, it wouldn't be prime sub. You would be hiring someone for resale. it would be a sales taxable transaction, which is exempt for a government entity anyway, and you would be hiring another contractor to do it, but it's not an excise taxable job, so it wouldn't be excise tax. It would be just a service provider, and you just hire
Yes.
someone else to do it. So you would be hiring that second person as a service provider for resale.
Yes, okay,
Yep.
thank you.
You're welcome. I have to look closer to the next one. Okay, that's on it's sales taxable, Israel. If you are doing those items, cleaning, changing filters, duct cleaning, calibration, all of those items are subject to sales tax. So that would be, you buy a filter to replace, okay? Smoke gas testing, adding Freon, that's all subject to sales tax. So it would not be excise taxable. So if that's all you're doing, those costs are subject to sales tax, state and city, based on the location of your customer. Okay?
And then we have another question.
Okay.
It's if you're hired as a construction manager to oversee a project and only supply general conditions items such as a temporary fence, dumpsters, toilets, etc., but do not hold any work contracts, is this considered excise taxable or sales taxable?
Okay, so you're not providing any excise taxable jobs. You're a construction manager, you're overseeing the project, and you only supply general condition items, okay? Then it's subject to sales tax. You would owe sales tax on it. Your service would be subject to sales tax, state and city. Okay? If you're not providing anything in the construction manager, like that slide that we have, I'll go back. Okay, if it's sales taxable if you're doing the following. It's excise taxable if you contract with the owner to build a building or other construction. You clean up crews, porta potty or dumpsters. That's part of the project. It's not, so you hire and pay the contractors working on the project, and you issue exemption certificates to the subs. So are you doing any of that? Do you pay for the dumpsters, the toilets, the temporary fences? Or, okay, so are you hiring? So you are actually hiring the contractors. Because if it's a sales taxable service, you're not hiring anybody. You just you have no contact with any of the contractors, and you do not pay any of the contractors. So you're in essence, if you're doing that and you're paying them, you're in essence a prime contractor, and you would owe excise tax on your services that you're being paid for. Okay. I think this is where we were at. The service provider is responsible for state and city tax on services. So for excise tax, that includes replacement parts, fixes parts. So we had a question earlier, how are the parts taxed? And that kind of depends on the project itself. If you are having replacement parts and fixes parts, you're a contractor, and those parts need to have use tax paid or sales tax paid on that. So if it's sales tax It does not include any replacement parts. You do not fix any parts. And the maintenance works, even if installation of equipment was subject to excise tax. So sales taxable and excise taxable on the same bill. If you do that, you can itemize and charge sales tax on the sales taxable portion and excise tax on the taxable portion. If charges are itemized on the bill, then you can do one of two things. You can separate them or use the 25% rule. And our 25% rule is if 25% or more is excise taxable, then excise tax applies to the total contract. So you do either primary purpose or the 25% rule.
We have another question.
Okay.
So is repair work only excise taxable if that contractor that did the initial install does the repair
No.
work?
No, repair work is excise taxable if, like Lisa had said earlier in the presentation, what determines it as repair work is if it's a repair to real property or if it's a fixture to real property, plumbed in, hardwired, bolted down. Those are the things. So if any of the repair work is done to real property, it's intended to be permanent, then that contractor doing that is subject to excise tax unless they are hired by the prime contractor as a sub. Then the prime contractor would be responsible for that repair or that excise tax. Okay, so we have a prime contractor that hires a sub. Okay, the prime is going to be responsible for all the excise tax if they hire a sub. They're going to give the subcontractor an exemption certificate. If the subcontractor is doing the repair, but the prime contractor hired them, he's going to give them an exemption certificate and the prime will be responsible for that. If a business has both, this is what we're talking about in most cases, that they have both a sales and an excise tax. The primary purpose of that job is what determines the tax. So if the primary purpose is excise taxable, the whole project would be excise taxable. And if they want to use the 25% rule where 25% or more is excise tax, the whole project becomes subject to excise tax. Then all the parts that are purchased are required to have sales tax on it or use taxes due. Okay, I'm going to address that question, Marcy. Just to be clear, if we do a service job and have labor and we use 150 in parts, we would pay use tax on the 150 and the whole invoice would be subject to excise tax. I need to be clear here. There's a difference between service providers and contractors, okay? Because service providers can be sales taxable, and then a service provider can be somebody that is cleaning your house or fixing your car, or in this case, a plumber or HVAC person coming and doing maintenance work, just maintenance cleaning of your furnace. They're doing a service job. It's not subject to excise tax until they actually replace something. So if you're talking a contractor replacing something in a furnace, replacing a sensor in a furnace, and they are replacing a $150 part, it kind of depends on the maintenance and the warranty agreements that we will get in later that will kind of explain that. But just cross the board, I hire you, something's wrong with my furnace. You come in and replace a sensor. It's an excise taxable job and you're going to owe, if that sensor is $150, you're going to owe tax on that $150 for that part if you did not pay tax on the parts when you purchased them. Okay, that's as a contractor. We got warranty issue a little bit later, and it depends on what the warranty is, and we'll go through that. So a lot of these questions may be answered a little bit later in the slide. What I'm just saying, if you have a dual type of business, in this case, plumbing and heating, they sell plumbing parts, they you know, some plumber, some businesses will actually sell parts, others won't. Some plumbers will purchase all of their parts with tax, then they don't have to worry about the parts when they put it into people. They just have to worry about the excise tax when they put it into people's homes. So warranties and stuff like that and maintenance, we were just touching bases on the maintenance. We'll get a little bit further in. So the dual businesses that have both, and we've got a couple of them here, keep in mind, if 25% or more is excise taxable, you are doing a repair or you are replacing a part, then excise tax is over the whole contract. And then any parts that you provided must have sales tax paid when you purchase them, or use tax is due. Is that clearing it up a little bit? If you have a certain specific scenario that you want us to go through, we will leave our email addresses at the end, and you can send us, you know, a printout, an invoice, and we can tell you exactly how it should be taxed. Okay? I know it's confusing. It is very confusing. Like I said, we're unique. The state of South Dakota is unique, really unique when it comes to excise tax. Now we're getting into warranties, okay? There's different types of warranties. There's manufacturer warranties, there's warranties sold by contractors, and there's service or maintenance contracts. So warranties are taxed according to what the warranty or maintenance contract covers. Charges for warranties or contracts that include repair to real property are subject to excise tax. Extended warranties, if it covers the parts and labors, if that warranty is, that's what it says it does, excise tax applies to the charge for the extended warranty. If the extended warranty covers parts only, the charge for the warranty is subject to sales tax. Excise tax applies to charges for installing the part. Manufacturer warranties. Covered parts and services. Manufacturer provides replacement materials covered by warranty with no change to the contractor or customer. No sales or use tax is due on parts. The parts are not included in owner furnished materials. Give you example here. A furnace fan covered by a manufacturer warranty is replaced. The contractor bills the manufacturer $150 for the fan plus $50 for the labor. There's no sales or use tax on the $150. $200 is subject to 2% excise tax. That's a manufacturer warranty. Okay. I don't know how often warranties are sold by contractors, but in a situation, if a contractor, that's someone doing real construction on real property, they will sell warranties throughout the United States. There's a lot of contractors that do sell warranties. There are some that will just say, okay, our warranty is we guarantee everything for 30 to 60 to 90 days. But some of them sell an actual warranty where you pay for it. The warranty charge itself, because it covers real property, construction to real property, is subject to excise tax. There's no tax on labor for services covered under the warranty if no charge is made to the customer. So you buy a warranty and you pay excise tax on the warranty, and they come and they do repairs and they do not charge you, then there is no charge. There's no tax due on that. Use tax will be due on parts used. Keep in mind, you guys, contractors are the user and consumer of all the materials that they provide. And so in this case, any parts that they may use or any materials that they may provide, they would owe use tax on if they did not pay sales tax when they purchased it. Charges made to the customer for labor or parts subject to sales or excise tax according to the work done. and parts covered by the manufacturer warranty not subject to sales or use tax. All other parts are taxable. Okay, service or maintenance contracts. And we kind of touched on this a little bit. This kind of just clears it up a little bit. Sales tax is due for contracts to clean or calibrate that do not include installation or repair to real property. Any charges to customer for deductibles or items not covered under the contract unless that contract covers a potential realty improvement. No sales tax on parts and labor covered by the service contractor. Okay, we talked about dual, and landscaping is another dual. Landscaping lawn care. So basically what it comes down to is there's certain things that are subject to sales tax in landscaping. You mow someone's grass, you spray, you design, you oriental shrubs, you trim and remove trees, utility line trimming. All of these items to your to my left here is subject to sales tax. But when you lay bricks, as a retaining wall, installation of underground sprinklers, do fountains or ponds, sump pump removal in fields, do sidewalks or concrete, creative concrete, shelter belt cleaning. Those are all subject to excise tax. Trimming and removing, including stump removal and grinding, are subject to sales tax in residential. If it is in a shelter belt, it is subject to excise tax. Keep in mind, if you are installing an underground sprinkler system and you are also doing seeding and sodding, the primary purpose of that job is the underground, because you have to. If you're doing underground sprinkler systems, you're going to have to seed or sod because it's all going to be torn up. So, but the primary purpose is laying or doing that sprinkler system. So that would be subject to excise tax. If you're doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you're not sure, if the 25% rule is a really good guide to go by, and you can do it by figures. If 25% or more of the project is subject to excise tax, the whole thing is subject to excise. This is where the caveat starts, though. Sales tax, if you have a sales tax license, you are able to buy your items that you're using in there without tax, the seed, the sod, all that stuff you can purchase without tax. Because if you're just doing the sales taxable, when you charge your customer the sales tax, you're charging them on the whole thing. If you do both, and the primary purpose ends up being excise taxable, and you bought all that seed and sod and anything else that goes with it without tax, then you as a contractor will owe this use tax on all that material that you used in the excise taxable project. Because if you're using any materials in excise taxable projects, the contractor is responsible for use tax if sales tax was not paid on those materials. Okay, that's how it works with that. Carpet and floor laying. Carpet laying is subject to sales tax. All of these listed here is subject to sales tax. If you lay ceramic tile, terrazzo, marble, or epoxy flooring, that is subject to, that's under the excise tax code, SIC code. So if you're just doing carpet laying, it's really easy. You can buy your carpet without tax. You go in and you lay it and you just charge your customer the sales tax based on where your customer is located at. If you do ceramic tile or terrazzo, and that's all you do, and that's all you do, everything's subject to excise tax. But all that tile, that ceramic tile and the terrazzo and the marble, when you buy that, you need to pay sales tax on that, or use taxes due on it. So it's really easy when it's kept separate, but when you put it together, again, there you run into issues. A lot of people that are years ago, used to do ceramic tile and carpet both. I don't see that as much anymore. It's more ceramic tile, terrazzo, marble, epoxy. It's a specialty. And most contractors that do that, that's all they do. They don't do carpet. But if for some reason you do both, again, primary purpose is what you look at first. And if it's kind of iffy, the 25% rule. If you're doing both, keep in mind, and it's all subject to excise tax then, any of the carpet or the linoleum or the asphalt that you've purchased, you need to pay use tax on if sales tax wasn't. I don't run into it as much. I don't see it as much for this. Normally that's pretty much separated. Gravel. If you are blading or grading a road after it's been spread, or you do road maintenance or road building, that's subject to contractor's excise tax. If you're just selling gravel or stockpiling or dumping on the road or crushing or spreading, just dumping it, you're not really blading it, you're just kind of dumping it and spreading it out, that's subject to sales tax. So, and hauling of gravel is not subject to tax at all if all you're doing is hauling from point A to point B. But if you combine any of these, then again, same type of situation. What is the primary purpose? So if you contract to perform work on highways or other projects such as blading, scraping, and you're also purchasing the gravel, you need to purchase the gravel with tax, pay tax on it, and then excise taxes on your total project. This one we just throw in because years ago, a lot of contractors, if they didn't, they would work as contractors during the summer, spring, summer, and fall. And in the winter, they didn't have a lot to do, so they would do snow removal. Well, years ago, some of them were charging excise tax on snow removal, where snow removal is not subject to excise tax, it's subject to sales tax. And if you do snow removal for a political subdivision or a city, a county, state government, that's all exempt because they're government entities and they're exempt from sales tax. Highway contractors, highway construction, they do need a contractor's excise tax and a highway contractor's license. That highway contractor's license is received from the Division of Motor Vehicles, and it is has to do with their IFTA and prorate, and has to do with the fuel. So that is issued by the Division of Motor Vehicles. All work performed by vehicles, machinery, or equipment within the right-of-way of construction, reconstruction, repair, or maintenance of public highways, storm sewers, ditches, and gutters are included in the right-of-way, and they are subject to excise tax. Okay. Some of the things that are subject to sales tax for highway contractors are, of course, the gravel crushing, any architect or surveying, gravel sales, hauling. A lot of times, I told you before, hauling is not subject to tax, but if you do the sale of gravel and the hauling, you're bundling it, so then it would all be subject to tax on that, sales tax. Engineering services, snow removal, that's all subject to sales tax. When a highway contractor is doing it within the right of way, some of these items above in the excise taxable, we normally look at as being sales taxable. But when it becomes part of a highway construction project, this becomes excise taxable, and the prime contractor can give the subs all of these: landscape mulching, traffic control, striping, seeding, sodding, all of these can be given an exemption certificate. That prime contractor's exemption certificate can be given by the prime to any would-be subs. The sub would owe sales or use tax on any materials or services that they provide for the job. And the striping is always subject to excise tax, whether it is paint or tape. They are listed under our Division C. And just to give you a basic, we have a book that's got all of these, the SIC, that's standard code book, and it's got all of these SIC numbers in, and that's what we kind of go by. It's kind of our Bible. She touched lightly on a qualified utility, so I'm going to touch a little bit deeper on that. A qualified utility project is taxed under a different law. And effective January 1st, 2014, utility companies are no longer allowed to take a deduction from gross receipts for payment received that are considered to be contributions to construction payments. So what it basically means, on the standard law that we talked about, we had a prime contractor, we had the subcontractor. The prime could give the subcontractor an exemption certificate and they would not owe the tax. Under a qualified utility, there really isn't subcontractors. The prime contractor will owe 2% excise on their gross receipts. The subcontractor will also owe 2% excise on their gross receipts. They do not, but the prime does not include the value of the owner furnished materials in the gross receipts. They do owe 4.2 state and applicable city tax on owner furnished materials. They owe state and city tax on use tax on any materials that they use. They cannot give prime contractors exemption certificates to the subs, and they cannot deduct amounts paid to others from the gross receipts. So the prime owes the 2 and the sub owes the 2%. So you have to really be aware what is a qualified utility. The subcontractor will owe 2% excise tax on his gross receipts. He will owe state and city or use tax on materials, and he cannot accept a prime contractor's exemption certificate from the prime. That's a little bit different than the other. Is there any question on prime contractor or on qualified utilities? If you think you are working for a qualified utility, but you are not sure, you can give us a call. We have it all listed in our system. You can give us a call or send us an email. We can verify that with you. And to make sure that you know that. We have it marked in our program. So spec builders is something we're just going to touch bases on a little bit more than what we normally do. But a spec builder is basically someone that is building, I'll just say a house. A spec builder is if you would build a house that you are going to sell. You own the land, build, sell. It may be a new construction or a remodel. A lot of homes that are being remodeled are actually spec homes. You don't have to do any of the work. You are required to have an exemption or a contractor's excise tax license. You can issue prime contractor exemption certificates to your sub. You owe sales and use tax on the cost, on the selling price of the house, less the cost of the land that you purchased it from, and any improvements to that land. You do owe excise tax if the home is sold within 4 years, and you can deduct the cost of the original structure, including the land, if remodeling. So if you're flipping a home and you purchase a home and you purchase it for $100,000, you turn around, fix it up, and you sell it for $300,000, you can actually deduct, you'd owe excise tax on the selling price less what you paid for the home. You cannot give exemption certificates for utilities to the lot line. You cannot issue exemption for land improvement. So if you is a new home and you had land improvement done, all excise tax had to be paid for that land improvement. Okay. In this case, if the contractor moves into the home, that sometimes happens. It happens more than you know. Excise tax would then be due when the structure is first used. Excise tax due on the amounts paid to the subcontractors. if he moves into it. The contractor, if he rents this home and it's valued over 100,000, we have guidelines for that, and that's on the next slide we'll go through. If the home is sold after being rented or used by the contractor within 4 years, then the excise tax is still due on the selling price, less the cost or fair market value of the land, less the amount of excise tax that paid when the home was completed. So he'd have to keep track of that. We do have a tax fax on spec home builders. It's a really good one. It's a very detailed one. And if you are into spec home building, I would strongly suggest that you read through that. That's some good information in there. The $100,000 rule. When the owner is not the prime contractor, each contractor hired by the owner is a prime and is responsible for the 2% excise tax on their receipts. Excise tax also applies to the materials furnished by the owner, cost or fair market value of the owner furnished materials, including sales or use tax on the materials. So that basically the 100,000, and most everything's over 100,000 anymore. I don't know if you'll have anything that's under that. If the I'll go next one. If the building is sold within 4 years of completion, excise tax is due on the selling price of the building, less the cost or fair market value of the land or land improvements. Contractor's excise tax is paid at the time of the building was leased or used, may be deducted. Just for an example, a contractor builds an apartment building. The market value of the building is $100,000 or more. Land cost is $100,000. He begins renting the apartment. He's liable for the 2% excise tax of, let's say, the market value is $100 million. Land cost is $100,000. He begins renting the apartments. The contractor's liable for 2% excise tax of $20,000 on the fair market building. So in a lot of cases, the 100,000 rule is a little bit different when applying for a apartment building. So if you are into spec home building, like I said, that tax fax is very detailed oriented. Portable sheds and buildings are not permanent buildings and are subject to sales tax. Sheds sold to utility companies are subject to sales tax unless the sale includes installation of a foundation. Contractors hired to install these sheds on the foundation are subject to excise tax and must include the value of the shed and the amount of excise tax paid. But if it's just a portable shed, the ones that you put in your backyard and you just set, that would be subject to sales tax.
We have a question.
Oh, okay.
What if the prime contractor didn't charge us, the owner, any excise tax? How do we pay it?
If you are you the owner of the house? Is that what we're talking about, a house? If you are you hire a contractor to build your house, and they didn't charge you any excise tax, they're responsible for the excise tax. I would give us a call and we can verify it. They don't have to show the excise tax to you. They just have to pay it. So if are we talking about a house, Mr. Patel? I'll be honest with you, so there are some contractors that aren't licensed with the state. And if I were to hire a contractor, I would make sure that they provided me with their excise tax license. Okay, so it was a building and you hired a prime contractor to build you a building. They As a prime contractor, they should have hired subs and given exemption certificates to subs, and the prime contractor is responsible for the tax. So if you wanted to let me know who that prime contractor was, maybe email me directly. I can verify that he has a license. But just to give you, if you are working with a prime contractor, it doesn't hurt to contact the state to make sure that they are licensed or ask to see their excise tax license. That verifies that they are legit in the state. I'd also ask to see insurance too, liability insurance. Okay, school-built homes. We're from Watertown, so Lake area does school-built homes, and you sometimes see them on the back of Lake area. They've got them on blocks, so that's what we're kind of talking about. Um, Built on blocks in the schoolyard, if they are built in blocks of schoolyard, they're subject to sales tax on the selling price when sold. Materials and labor can be purchase exempt from tax because schools, of course, are exempt entities. If they're built on the owner's site, the total contract price is subject to contractor's excise tax. Tribal tax agreements. We have 5 tribes in the state with sales, use, tourism, and contractors excise tax agreements: Standing Rock, Rosebud, Cheyenne River, Ogallala, and Crow Creek. We have 2 tribal governments with a limited tax collection agreement for use and contractors excise tax. That's Yankton Sioux and Sisseton Wahpeton. And we have 2 tribes with no tax agreement, and that's Flandreau, Lowell Brew. The Tribal Revenue Department has jurisdiction over licenses owned and operated by enrolled members of the tribe. The state Department of Revenue handles all other licenses. And it kind of works the same way as the city tax goes. With the tribal tax collection agreements, the state will collect it, and then they will remit the tax to the actual tribes that have the collection agreements with us. So that's how that works. We'll get in a little bit of contractor's excise tax when working with a reservation. When you work with a reservation with an agreement, it's the same rate as state excise tax, 2%, instead of, but it's not in addition to a state tax. It applies the same as state excise tax, subject to the same rules, and it's reported on the state excise tax return. It's reported in the special jurisdiction section on the state tax return using the code assigned to that special jurisdiction. Keep in mind, again, we collect it and then we remit it to the state or to the tribe, the tribe that has the collection agreement. The tribes without a collection agreement, we don't have a signed agreement with the state, with them, so no excise tax if contractor is an enrolled member of the tribe that controls the Indian country where the project is located. Excise tax is due if the project is by a non-Indian contractor on Indian country and it's subject to the 2% excise tax, contractor's excise tax. Sales by an enrolled member tribe on a non-agreement Indian country controlled by that member's tribe are not subject to state sales tax. So in that case, it has to be a controlled member tribe. Tribes may impose their own tribal taxes. They have TECRO and TARO taxes on the tribes, and that is strictly controlled by them. So that is something that you do have to, when you do work on an Indian reservation or tribal, you have to go ahead and contact them. They do have permits too, so. Okay, Sarah, I did get that. Okay, so we'll go back. Sales by an enrolled tribal member on a non-agreement Indian country controlled by that member's tribe. So we're talking non-agreements with the state. And it has to be, it's an enrolled tribal member of that tribe selling to another enrolled member of that tribe. Okay, so they're not subject to state sales tax. And if it is a excise tax we're talking about, it's due if it's a tribe without a tax agreement. Okay, so they don't have an agreement for the state to actually collect it. So if you're doing work on a tribe without a tax agreement, and did you get the ones that I told you about? If you are non-Indian and you're doing work there, it's subject to state tax. So, and I've got one other thing going on here too. It's subject to state excise tax because we do not have an agreement with them. But if it's a enrolled tribal member doing work for another enrolled tribal member, then there's no excise tax due to the state or sales tax due to the state. But that's on non-agreement reservations. So we are talking the ones that were non-agreement. Give you those. And that would be Landrew and Lower Brule. Those are tribes that do not have a tax agreement with the state. Okay.
All right, we do have another question too.
Okay.
Just to confirm that the understanding is correct, contractors pay sales tax on materials at the time of purchase when the vendor charges it. If materials are brought without sales tax or bought without sales tax, for example, out of state or exempt vendor, then the contractor must self-assess and remit use tax. No additional sales tax is due when those tax materials are later used on a project. Only the contractor's excise tax applies to the project's gross receipts.
Okay. Yes, for the first one, contractors pay sales tax on materials at the time of purchase when the vendor charges it. So contractors should be paying sales tax or use tax on all materials that they use in the course of their business. But excise tax is due on both labor and materials. And those materials must include sales tax. Okay, did that answer it? So okay, good. Non-agreement Indian country exception. Okay. Project, and this is for Indian use only. So a project must be located on tribal land controlled by that tribe, performed and paid for by the tribe, and for tribal use only. Projects that qualify for exclusive Indian use only are tribal housing, schools, hospital, and tribal offices. Okay. If they not for tribal use only is Indian casinos, ranches, roads, stores, motels, factories, and non-Indian housing. So basically, the non-agreement Indian country exception is for tribal houses, tribal housing, schools, hospitals, and tribal offices. That's Indian use only, cannot be used by anybody else. Okay, filing your excise tax return. Electronic filing is the preferred method. It's called ePath. They have the website to access ePath. Any questions or answers, there questions or assistance, we have a toll-free number, or you can email the ePath at epaths@statesd.us. And there are all sorts of benefits for ePath. You can available 24/7, multiple payment options, allows additional users access to all or specific accounts, automatically saves for later dates, changes password security, email addresses at any time. You basically have control over um, bank information, one-time payment, um, review and file pay history, amended terms online. It is really a handy deal. We used to have a different online filing and it was very cumbersome. This one is very user friendly and most people use it. If you aren't using it, I highly suggest that you look into it because it's a very good, lots of benefits. When you file your sales or excise tax return, you can now pay either with credit card. Keep in mind you do have a 2.45 convenience fee charge for a debit or credit, or you can have it just automatically taken out of your bank account. All documents for records is to be kept for a period of 3 years after the return is filed, longer if depreciating capital assets. It's a good idea to keep them a little bit longer than 3 years. I know IRS does require 7. This is just the list of things that you need to keep if you are ever audited or reviewed. Sales and use tax, contractors, excise tax returns, and any work papers. Any federal income tax returns for businesses, summary account records, sales invoices, purchase invoices, beginning and ending inventories, bill of lading, canceled checks, contracts, depreciation schedules, exemption certificates, keep those exemption certificates, supporting documentation and all deductions. Okay, Stacy, the bid factor 2.041 is for your convenience. It is just a bid factor. It's for bid only. It's not what you are actually paying on excise tax. Contractors' excise tax is 2% of your gross receipts. And that's what basically the law states. So we allow you to do the 2.041 to recoup a little bit of the extra money for your convenience. You don't have to charge the 2.041. You can charge 2%, but you just have to keep in mind your total gross receipts. Everything that you got from your customer is what goes on line 1 of your return and you pay 2% of. So it is a choice. It's just to help you recoup a little bit extra. Okay, you can contact us either by calling us on our toll-free number. We do have email, and that is our state email. It is monitored by a couple people in the state, and then they will forward that information out. We do have our website there. That is where our bid factor is calculator is located at. You can visit or call your local Department of Revenue office. We do have a chat feature that you can go ahead and click on and ask questions. It is operated Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And we do have publications and tax facts under that website. I see that Lori did put the tribal tax fact. Please read through that very well. That's a very well written tax facts. Feel free to ask us questions in the email. Each scenario is different, and I've been here 25 years, and I have found every time I talk to people, there's different things going on. I'm just typing in my email address. Okay, this is just a list of our field offices: Aberdeen, Pierre, Rapid City, Sioux Falls, Yankton. The slides were actually emailed to you. Yeah, the slides were emailed to that invitation email. There should have been the slides in that. I think, Lori, you could probably send her a set if she needs it. Heather. Okay, we do have Facebook and X, and we have YouTube videos, and you can sign up for our newsletter. Our website has a lot of good information. So Lisa and I are going to stay on here for a while. This kind of concludes our presentation. We're going to stay on here for a little while. If you have questions you want to throw at us, that would be great, and we can answer them at that point. But otherwise, that concludes this presentation. Okay, Taylor, you have a question. Did you want to email me that question, or did you want to ask it here?